Jim Farmer, Georgia Voice.
Hey
Thanks so much.
Jim,
How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much. So, how did this project come up for you?
Um, well, I was paying attention to Pete. I mean,
Okay.
as a political junkie, knew he was a rising star, mayor of South Bend, but he'd run for chair of the Democratic Party and lost. But I was keeping my eye on him, and I knew he was thinking about running for president. It seemed very improbable that he could mount a credible campaign, but interesting. And I also knew that the norms of American politics have been shattered, and like who can be a credible candidate and get elected is, and post Obama's election, Trump's election, anything's possible. So that was intriguing to me. What was really most compelling was the possibility that we would have access to Pete in this
Okay.
journey, which frankly didn't expect to get very far. But the idea that Pete would let us in and we could see a presidential campaign from a really kind of intimate perspective was really exciting to me as a documentary storyteller. And um, I kind of, I mean, actually, I said when my friends who produced the film approached me about the idea, I said no. Um, but they said, go, watch this thing that Pete just did, this town hall on CNN. You got to watch it. I was like, all right, I'll watch it. And I watched it. I was like, huh, wow, okay. There's something. He's got something going on that even more than I imagined. And then I called him back and I was like, okay, I'll shoot its development. I don't think there's a film, but let's do some shooting and see how it feels.
When
Let's see
did
if
you?
this access that he seems open to is really for real.
Okay.
And it was.
When did you start filming?
We engaged with him in March 2019 and started filming really for real in April 2019. So it was shortly before, probably 3 weeks before he announced his candidacy officially. We were filming.
One of the things that fascinates me about this documentary is that, Pete and Chasten, this going on in their lives changing, and then you're filming all this. I mean, how did you find him that way every moment, just even killed and relaxed and just receptive to all this?
Oh, you cut out for a second, Jim. Were you talking about Pete or Chasten?
I mean, they seem so even
Yeah,
keeled
yeah,
throughout this entire
yeah,
project. I mean, did it surprise you that they were always just so pleasant
yeah.
and good natured about running
Uh,
for politics?
yeah. Well, Pete is like remarkably even keeled. I mean,
Okay.
always. I mean, I spent a lot of time with him over a year filming this, from like staff of four, to like nearly the top of the heap, and that was a kind of vertiginous rise. And he managed. I mean, he got really exhausted, and there were some hard moments, but he managed to be pretty even keeled. Chasten is very different than Pete, and emotionally much more kind of open and alive and funny in ways. Pete's funny, but in a different way. And I just their chemistry was really appealing to me, and I loved kind of how old fashioned their relationship was, but how kind of very modern and new as this millennial gay couple on a big political stage. And I loved that they were working it out and
Sure.
letting me in a little bit to get to see some of the excitement, but also the tensions of being on this journey together, this rocket ship. And I suddenly felt like it wasn't the film I imagined, that there was much more of a relationship, a love story, the two of them holding on tight to each other. And it was a way of understanding Pete as a somewhat remote person through Chasten's point of view. And I love that vantage point. And I really like Chasten too. And so that really opened out the possibilities of this film for me.
There obviously, as an openly gay candidate, with Chasten at his side nonstop, there is some homophobia that he had to deal with and still continues to deal with. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how that affected, your filming, or how that affected him as he was proceeding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that their identities are really as gay men. They've had very different lived experiences. Of course, Pete was closeted for much more of his life. Chasten grew up in northern Michigan, but out at a much earlier age. And I think that they bring those lived experiences to their relationship and to their political identities, and it all gets um, played out in this story in different ways. I think Chasten also articulates this well, and Pete too. I mean, Chasten talks about the fact that Pete's not running to be president of gay America, but his identity is really a core part of who he is, and he he talks about that. It makes a very moving speech to the Victory Fund about coming out or being closeted in as a young man. Pete does. And wanting, to not be gay. And then you hear them talk to each other in private after that. You also hear Pete talk about the fact that for some people, their identity as gay men was everything. And for other people, it was a minor detail. And I think having to watch Pete kind of navigate that high wire act of identity is a fascinating part of this journey that we were on with them.
Obviously, they're both parents right now, but how much of that, did you have any inkling of that as they were filming? They were about to come out really soon?
Yeah. I didn't know until it comes up in the film, actually. There's a scene in the movie where Chasten is talking to one of his aides about this question, because they had wanted to be parents at that time, and we're exploring that process. But at the same time, you hear Chasten's being cautioned to not talk about it too publicly, and I just that's such I think it's one of those sequences in the film. You also hear Pete talk about that really lets us in on their personal journeys that were, to me, as much a part of this story as the political narrative. And I think the two are inextricably related. What is personal is political, and what is political is personal, as Pete talks about, the fact that he could legally marry. The decisions that are made in those big white buildings, they matter in our lives. And that's what, motivates him to run for office. And the core message of his campaign of belonging is rooted in his own identity as a gay man in a community where he felt like he didn't quite fit. He fit in some ways and not in other ways. And I think that kind of resonant message, which fueled the campaign and is what so many people connected with, whether they were gay or straight, I think that accounts for his success as a candidate. And understanding where that comes from in their lives, their lived lives, is a big part of this, and a kind of depth to the story for me.
What was it like to be able to premiere this in Chicago?
Well, I think that what was really nice. I think I really enjoyed showing it at New Fest in New York with more of a queer audience, and it's not a monolithic community, and I think there are probably a lot of different responses. But I love the laughter in the room. I think people are emotionally moved and inspired, and hopefully the portrait feels very honest. Hopefully it's it's an empowering story in the ways that the campaign wasn't, but it's not an endorsement of Pete. I think it's a pretty unvarnished depiction of the journey that they both went on and who Pete is. And I hope it's a little bit of history, to have an out gay candidate on the presidential stage doing that well. And I don't know if the film will stand that test of time, but I thought I was watching history unfold. And Pete's future is bright. He says time is on his side. So I think we'll see.
Exactly. I'm always struck by how young he is. He's so polished and smooth. He's so very young. He really is. Anyway, I really, really like this documentary a lot. Mayor Pete debuts on Amazon November the 12th. It's extraordinary. Thanks for joining us, Jesse Moss, and continue good luck with the film.
Thanks, Jim. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too. Thanks so much.